large research projects, which in turn will affect our reputation over time. So steps we take today with regard to the inputs, the easy things we can change, can sometimes take up to 10 years or more before their impact is felt on institutional reputation. Now, it's very tempting for managers to focus on the short-term decisions without taking into account the long-term outcomes, because they are much more difficult to influence and take much greater effort. I reckon that anything I do today to try and improve my reputation for research, for example, in the QS, where they have academic reputation, anything I do today to try and impact that will be 10 years before it actually has an effect on the academic reputation of the institution. So what can we do then, if that's the case? Well, first of all, we have to make sure we socialize internally that there is a tension between the short term and the long term, and not ignore that fact. And we have to ensure that in any planning process, when we take decisions, we understand that there is we may allow serious consideration of what the long-term impact is going to be. And that there is a time lag. We need to make sure when we take our decisions that that tension is understood and properly discussed. As I said before, without choices, without priorities, you don't have a strategy. So those choices might involve withholding investment in some subject areas, or even reducing the size of some departments while allowing others to grow significantly. Now, this quote here is from a recent report by the big consultancy company McKinsey. And we can see that the need to prioritize is a common requirement in any industry or business, but in my experience, it is equally important in higher education. So my third area was people. Now, all universities trade on their reputation. That's true of individual academics, it's true of schools or departments, and whole institutions. But it's the people who first and foremost are responsible for building that reputation. People are universities' greatest assets. And if you want a successful strategy, you quite simply have to get successful people. Now, any university which wants to be strategic in outlook and make the right decisions will need to appoint strategic leaders above everything else. That is, on both sides of the house, academics, who can lead departments, schools, faculties and research groups, but you also need administrative leaders who can lead whole divisions for human resources, finance, estates, quality assurance, and, yes, even planning. I'd also add that it's very important in any successful university for the senior leadership team to work consciously to break down the us and them mentality of academics at war with administrators and vice versa. There are many ways of doing that, but what is a constant is that it is always the responsibility of the senior management team to make sure it's done. And if it's not, if there is that tension and lack of cooperation, first and foremost, the senior management team has to bear responsibility for that. I use the term strategic leaders. So what do I mean by strategic leader? I like this definition by Rowe and Hussein. Of course, we all understand the need for leaders to set a long-term vision, to inspire, to set high goals and standards, and take people with them. Everybody understands that. However, what Rowe and Hussein demonstrated through their research was that if you don't understand the need to manage the day-to-day operations effectively as well, then the vision never gets implemented. Strategic leaders don't, of course, do that operational management themselves, but what they do is ensure that they appoint and nurture the managers who can do it, and that they have the processes, policies and actions to get things done on the ground. Now, these are 7 characteristics of good strategic leaders according to Rowan Hussein. I'm not going to say anything about the first 5 because I've already said something about that, but I do want to illustrate bullets 6 and 7. Behaviours are vital. Now, who normally talks about behaviours in implementing strategy? But behaviours are vital. You gain authority and influence not by virtue of your office alone, but also by virtue of your behaviour, what you say and do, how you conduct yourself, how you treat your peers and your subordinates. And just as an aside, you often hear the saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm sure you've heard that somewhere before. I'm not sure I agree with that, actually, because if an organisation does not have the right culture, or its culture is a culture of underperformance, what do you need to change it? You need a strategy, right? You need a strategy to change the culture if the culture is not right. So I'm not quite sure I agree that culture just eats strategy for breakfast. However, what is certainly true is that the culture of an organisation is extremely important in effective strategic planning. And it's first and foremost the leaders who determine that culture, as well as visionary and managerial management styles. A true strategic leader also leads from the front in terms of what behaviours they expect of themselves and therefore of other people. I have seen such leaders in action at close quarters, and believe me, if you want a successful strategy and to have it implemented, you have to have such people. Appoint the best academics you can, and particularly those who are genuine leaders. Not all good researchers are able to lead departments and schools. It's very important to recruit those people and take the time and effort needed to get the right people in place. But of course, nothing worth having in life is free. The best people need to be attracted and incentivized to come to us, which is why we need resources to invest in equipment, infrastructure, buildings and facilities and so on. And why we need the right recruitment and retention policies. The same applies actually for professional services or the administration. We have always found that it's important to mix up recruitment for the administration, taking people both from within but also from outside the sector. It's really good to recruit people who bring a range of skills and expertise gained from other sectors, especially when it concerns the more generic functions like human resources, finance, estates, and IT. This helps refresh the pool of talent and enables us to learn from other sectors. So my fourth area was engagement. So you have good people, but how do we get them working for us? How do we ensure we harness all that talent so my university is the best it can possibly be? So here we're moving into the realms of strategy implementation, which I said was the most difficult. And Johnson, Scholes and Whittington said that in the slide I showed at the beginning, and I thoroughly agree with them. It's hard because it requires us to interact and engage with many different people throughout the university. That is hard work. All those people will have their different agendas, allegiances, and interests. So engaging them is going to be a challenge. Often, institutions engage their staff when they're developing the strategy. They hold workshops, brainstorming, there's consultation, there's feedback loops, and so on. But what about after the strategy is written and it needs to be implemented? It's no use just communicating with staff and telling them to get on with it. No, if we are to implement a strategy and take the university to a better place, we need sustained engagement with staff throughout the university on a continuous basis. So that sustained engagement can take different forms. Firstly, I want to talk about formal top-down mechanisms. These are probably the most common when implementing a strategy. And I've seen many such implementations, both in the UK and in the Middle East, where there's a whole list of programs, projects, and initiatives with responsibility for action and some means of monitoring and reporting on progress. Now, all of this is perfectly fine. Indeed, it is very necessary. Here you can see an example from my own institution, from Bristol. We've got 6 core themes covering the sorts of things you find in most university plans. Under each of those themes, we have many programs, projects, and initiatives, what some universities would call an action plan. And all of these are driven correctly top-down. And we have over 60 of them in total. Nearly all of these have a professionally qualified program or project manager helping ensure everything is delivered on time, on budget, and to the desired standard. Each one can be very extensive. For example, under digital infrastructure, we have a new HR and finance system and a new student life cycle system, both of which cost many millions and take years to implement. And all of these projects are grouped into 3 portfolios, looking after capital projects, academic developments. That's where, for example, we have a school or a department which is going to double in size in a very short time, and what we call ways of working, which is really about processes and systems. So new IT systems would fall under that portfolio. These report regularly to our senior management team using a standard report, which we call the strategy delivery report. So the senior team understands what progress is being made and can identify and manage any issues. So that was top down, but what about bottom up? Here, you need, in my view, a planning process. At Bristol, we call this the integrated planning process. This is a formal process which is designed to get all faculties, all schools, all professional service divisions engaged in strategy implementation. They produce annual 5-year plans. Sorry, that's a bit of a messy diagram, but it's meant to show that on an annual basis, they produce a 5-year forward look for their school or faculty, using the same 6 themes in our university strategy. And there isn't time to go into the details of how we run that process, but perhaps I can just say a couple of things about the principles and the features which underpin it. So, it's designed to produce academic strategies for all parts of the university. What is my strategy for research? What is my strategy for the student experience, for education, for internationalization, globalization, and so on? We set realistic targets for student recruitment and research income based on market intelligence. The process is genuinely two-way, and by that I mean that the school and faculty strategies can inform the university one, and we refresh it on an ongoing basis, as well as the other way round. And colleagues are responsible and accountable for the performance of their schools, and we use the plans to allocate resources to maximise strategic advantage. So in other words, at the end of this process, we allocate a budget both for next year and for financial projections for the next 5 years in such a way that it enables us to realise the benefits of our strategy. The plans are 5 years, as I said, they're refreshed every year. We require them to be co-created between the academic school and the administrative divisions, thereby encouraging partnership working between the academic and administrative side of the house. We use strategic performance indicators to measure performance, the same ones we use at university level, and we don't want long documents. We use something called a strategy thumbnail, which is short and contains plans, targets, and performance data. So here you've got our Department of Education actually working on their strategy thumbnail. Okay, whole department has an away day. They develop their thumbnail, and this is an extract from a faculty thumbnail. You can see here there's basic information about targets and performance against those targets. And this extract is from the same thumbnail showing sections on education and the student experience. And here we highlight new programs that are planned to come on stream in the future. And the planning process involves a strategic conversation which lasts almost the whole year between the academic schools and faculties, the administration, and the senior management team. At the heart of that process, there are 3 meetings between the senior management team and the deans of each faculty, in which we consider the performance of our schools against their strategic performance indicators. We set targets and the budget that they need to deliver their future plans. In this way, we're seeking to engage all our staff throughout the university in thinking how they can help contribute to the implementation of the university strategy at a local level. But of course, those are formal structures, but you also need many other forms of engagement to deliver a strategy. Here we've got some examples of multiple staff engagement events throughout the year. For example, we have meetings between the university senior management team and 200 of our top managers, heads of school, academic heads of school and their school managers, deans of faculty and the faculty managers, directors of research, directors of education, 200 of them meet with the senior management team to talk about implementation of the strategy. We have all staff meetings with specific strategic themes. And the senior team, sorry you can't see that, but it basically says the senior team visits every school and division on a regular basis to discuss issues of strategy. The Vice-Chancellor has dinners where he invites specific academics, senior academics, to discuss key strategic issues. And we use the staff bulletin and the VC's blog and so on to report on progress against strategic performance indicators, to advertise the timing of other strategic events and so forth. And by the way, a whole series of events which involve students in issues directly related to them, around things like assessment and feedback, the structure of the academic year, student mental health and well-being, and so on. And the point I'm trying to make here is by showing all these examples is that it's very hard work to get our staff engaged in implementing strategy. Not because they're lazy or indifferent, but because it just takes that energy and drive from the top of the university to engage all of its staff. and you need many and varied approaches for that. So our engagement strategy requires a huge amount of hard work to ensure both staff and students remain actively involved. So then the big question is, how do we know if all this activity is having the right effect and producing the right outcomes? Well, of course, that's where strategic performance indicators come into the whole picture. Here you've got an example of one set of strategic performance indicators using national student data. Now in the UK, we are very blessed by having something called HESA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, which collects data on all universities and then makes it available in a consistent format across the whole sector, which allows us to do benchmarking with our peers. These SPIs are used at school and faculty level in our integrated planning process. We also aggregate them up to university level and can benchmark against the sector. And that is what the whole SPI dashboard looks like. Each one of our SPIs is aligned to our strategic themes, to our SMART objectives, and is benchmarked to external data. So then we are able to report to our senior management team and the governing body using the strategy delivery report, which I showed you earlier, which is monitoring programs, projects, initiatives, and on the outcomes through the monitoring of strategic performance indicators. All of those go into a summary report, which is called a strategy snapshot, which you've got here. Down here, you've got our strategic themes. That gives you an overview of how we are doing against our programs and projects. And this is an overview, how are we doing using strategic performance indicators. And that is refreshed regularly for our senior team. Finally, I want to talk about partnerships. There is a lot I could say about it. I'm going to focus on just one aspect very quickly. So no institution can manage alone for very long. And as we know, there are different types of partnership, ranging from partnerships between individual academics to whole institutional strategic alliances. Some partnerships are domestic, some international. So I just wanted to highlight the work of someone called Jonathan Adams, who published an article in Nature in May 2013. So he carried out a study into the importance of international partnerships for research. And the findings were quite staggering and incredibly useful for any institution that is developing a strategy for raising its global profile. And of course, okay, 2013 is some time ago now, but the findings are exactly relevant today. So this graph shows UK research output, which has trebled over the last 30 years. Okay? Nothing surprising about that, I guess. What is interesting, however, is that domestic research, which is the research where the output is only with other UK authors, has grown very little during that period. You can see it's a sort of gentle increase. Most of the expansion has been in papers with international co-authors. And as a percentage of all of the outputs, domestic papers have fallen from almost 90% 30 years ago to less than 50% today. So the obvious question is, why is that? Why are UK academics so keen to collaborate? Well, obviously one answer is because they can partner with experts from all over the globe, which enriches the quality of the research that's done. But there's also at least one other reason. So Richard Adams showed that both for the US and the UK, an academic has a significantly higher chance of her or his work being cited if they have an international partner. In fact, their work had between 36 and 52% more chance of being cited. So partnership working is the future for researchers, and successful institutions are doing all they can to encourage, reward, and incentivize these kinds of partnerships, especially those with collaborators on the other side of the world. I don't know if you can see that, but that is basically showing on the y-axis field-weighted citation impact, and on the x-axis international collaboration. You can see there's almost a perfect correlation between those two things. And right up at the top there, Oxford and Cambridge, they are not brilliant just because they do research in the UK. There is a huge amount of collaboration with international partners. So I would recommend highly that paper in Nature by Richard Adams. There are some key points here, which you can have on my slides later. But just I thought the third bullet point is an important one. Most successful collaborations tend to be bilateral. There are two partners. The more partners you have, the more challenging it is to make it work. And the last bullet is related. If you have limited capacity for partnerships, which most institutions do, including my own, you need to prioritize and focus on building a small number around your research strengths, certainly at institutional level. And finally, this is the penultimate slide actually, so it would be remiss of me not to mention league tables. What's important to remember in the global league tables is that at least 60% of the ranking is based on research in some form or another. For example, the QS ranking has 20% based on citations, 40% on academic reputation. Now, it's not teaching that drives academic reputation, since most international academics know little about the quality of teaching in other parts of the globe. What they do know about is the research outputs and the reputation of leading academics. So again, this points to the importance of international collaborations and getting your research well known. Finally, if you're interested in strategy and planning in higher education, I can recommend that book. It was actually written, it's Routledge, and it was written by people in my position in the UK, right throughout the UK, directors of strategic planning. I wrote one chapter in it, but it's got lots of interesting and useful stuff. Very happy to take questions. Thank you very much indeed.